Hello, vintage sewing enthusiasts. Today I am covering a class 15 Singer sewing machine. Often when I am, finding vintage sewing machines and, evaluating their condition or figuring out if it's a sewing machine that I want to purchase or if I think it's worth restoring, I go through a lot of different sort of processes in order to evaluate if the condition of the machine's worth restoring and what I'm in for. And when I first started working on vintage sewing machines, I bought a Singer 1591, which this is what this is. A Singer 1591, very often you can identify them because they will have a potted motor in the back here. They will have a tension unit that's on the front faceplate. There's other ways to identify class 15 machines. If you look at the vintage sewing garage, gentleman Rain will show you that sort of the curves, and you can identify different machines based on sort of like the back side or the serial number. In this case, you could identify it from the serial number it is on the machine. This is a class 15 machine. This is a really great example of a machine that I would pass on. In fact, me owning it was a byproduct of another sewing machine that I had purchased. If you're looking for a vintage sewing machine to start with, very often these are inexpensive. They're very capable, very hardworking machines. And if you wanted to invest your time and your energy in learning how to repair these and or just get them sewing on your own, it's a great place to start. Mostly because they are quite common. I think Singer sold, I think it's like 25 million class 15 machines in the times they had made them. This machine pretty much remained unchanged after it was given reverse sometime in the early 30s. The capability to reverse. This machine was made up until the 1960s. I actually have a 15125, which is one of the last sewing machines that they made, Singer made for the class 15. So, and in talking about condition, this machine actually showed up on my doorstep with a industrial machine. So I did not purchase this as it was. I actually got it as part of a package deal, and I just took it. And I've been using it for parts. So there's some stuff missing on it at the moment, and that's mostly because I did keep it around because occasionally I do need things from a sewing machine, and purchasing individual parts from eBay, sellers or whatever places you may find sewing machine parts. Sometimes it feels like you're murdering your sewing machine, but really using it as a donor allows you to give life to another sewing machine. So the characteristics of the class 15, this is an oscillating hook, and I'll go ahead and see if you can see. Whoop, you can see down here. You'll see that when I advance the wheel, you're going to notice that the hook itself, where they're forming a stitch, it's oscillating back and forth. So it rocks forward and then rocks back. These class 15 machines, there were lots of articles, I think, in the 40s about how, the rotary hooks, rotary sewing machines were superior and, a whole bunch of other things. But oscillating hooks still exist, and people still put them in modern sewing machines. There are examples of this that, are modern day. And actually design features of this 15 are present in a lot of sewing machines that are still being made. Okay, so covering condition issues. I wanted to look at just overall condition. You're going to note that there's wear on the bed. I think that you can possibly see that a lot of the stuff is chipping. This was stored in a workshop outdoors, and a lot of the times just environmental conditions. So chipping in the Japanning and shellac, you'll see the decals are missing. I believe the gentleman who was using this actually was using it for some heavy-duty upholstery work, probably beyond its capabilities, but same thinking applying that it was probably considered a bit of a throwaway machine. You'll see there's shellac and Japanning missing on the upper portions of the machine, and then on the hand wheel, and a whole bunch of other things. So these are the grease ports for the motor, and these are all chipped as well. And you're going to notice, now I don't know if I can zoom in on this a bit, I generally don't like to see if someone's really messed with machines. You can kind of tell by the state of the heads of these screws that are here. You're going to see that they're chewed up a bit, and you're going to see that condition issue carry through on different parts of the machine. A little bit alarming. Here's another one I find alarming. You are going to see a chewed up screw here. And this is actually for the cover for the motor itself. And so I'm actually making an assumption when I'm looking at this machine, just high level, that it has, in addition to being sort of bad, poor condition cosmetically, that it's entirely possible that if I wanted this to be running and safe to use, just based on sort of where there are marks on the machine, it's been repaired, maybe not by a professional. A professional sewing repair person would use the correct screw, the thread, the correct screwdriver to not leave, destroy the screw head as they were repairing it. And so that alone would make me worried about sort of what's happening with this sewing machine. In addition to that, the things you really don't want to see, and I'm going to zoom in on this, and this is really key, especially if you're a beginner and you don't want to start out with working on the electrical components of a sewing machine. There are wonderful resources in terms of how to rewire these motors. It's some basic stuff. Anytime you're working with electricity, though, obviously can result in death. It's maybe not the first place to start if you're, working on, wanting to get into vintage sewing machines. But this is complete, I'm going to say crap, because you should not have electrical tape at this point on your sewing machine. And this is going to be connected to the motor mount. The difficulty with this, now I'm going to show this to you because this is very easy to hide because of the location of this wire. Okay, and actually, now that I'm pulling this apart, you're going to see it. This is not safe. And this is actually at the motor mount here itself. So the wires are broken at the base of the motor. So if you're starting out, this is not the machine you want. You want to make sure that the condition of this wire from the motor and then the light itself are safe. And so in this case, if you were just looking at this sort of casually after looking it up on Facebook or Marketplace, this is tucked in behind like this, and this is actually the terminal mount, and these cords are effectively kind of like that. And then there's a terminal plug that sits on top of that, and then it goes into this screw hole, and then that's where sort of the machine is plugged in. And so if you were looking at this machine just casually, the only way to really look, and I recommend bringing some eyeglasses, a magnifying glass, or something that you can kind of take a closer look, you would be able to see this is cracking here, and that's bad news. This is probably worth restoring because I do find these really common in my area, and I do need them for parts. I don't need this one for parts, to restore this one. I have restored them, and I think they're worthy to definitely learn on, and when they sew, they're wonderful. So despite the fact that this is in poor condition, I just wanted to point out that this is, this sewing machine itself sews. It probably would sew wonderfully if we had a motor that worked and the electrical was working, because it has nothing's binding it. It's actually in really good shape. So turning the hand wheel, so say you had this machine show up on your Marketplace or whatever, and it's in this poor condition and it's free, sure, take it. If someone's asking a couple $100, obviously you can find something in much better condition and it'll be operable and has better cords or has replacement cords on them, which means that somebody had gone through the trouble of restoring it. It's worth money as a beginner to buy a machine that has been restored by someone else. Don't try to save money to end up with, a house catching fire because you bought a machine that's, got electrical problems. Again, number one concern with these machines is really the condition of the electrical cords. And so this one's an older one. It's probably from the 40s. I don't know if I looked up the serial number itself. Again, worth restoring. Get one to play with. Learn how to do sort of basic maintenance on your machine. It's really a wonderful thing to start with, and it's kind of very common, very easy to find. And once you get it sewing, I mean, you could really have be one and done for a straight stitcher. I mean, it'll probably out-sew anything you can buy today that's probably $1,000, and it'll, sew through thick enough material. All right, I'm going to take a pause here, and then I'm going to pull up another example of a sewing machine and talk about the Class 15 a little bit more. And we're back. This looks a little different than the Class 15 machine that you saw earlier, and I want to talk about sort of your next phase, or maybe you're starting out with your collecting and or restorations, and you've been given and or offered a sewing machine that looks similar to this. This is a Brother sewing machine. It's a straight stitcher, and this is from probably about 1956, I believe. Similar in time frame from a lot of these Singers that are being sold, and I wanted to talk about they call them a lot of times Japanese clone machines. I find that to be disrespectful for the engineering that the Japanese teams put into these sewing machines. They had taken the Class 15 Singer sewing machine mechanics and then turned it into, I believe this is actually a whole different machine. It has common features. It's an oscillating hook. It has the forward reverse in the same location. You'll see that the tension and then that this has been moved to the front, similar to a 201 or a 221. But you're going to see some things that I'll point out that are a little bit different. Okay, so the Class 15 clones, I call them improved Class 15s. They're improved. They're definitely modeled after the Class 15, but they are not a Class 15 machine, and there's a few things that make them different. Very often, they will have a very strong motor. So this is actually a 1 amp motor, and it's the machines it had for, I think Singer had a 0.7 or 0.5 amp. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll put it in the description if I can remember. And it's a much stronger motor, so it sort of gives you more punching power at low speeds and more speed, obviously, when you're trying to get through maybe a batch of curtains. You're trying to go through them as fast as possible. The improved 15s will have tensions moved from the front of the nose plate to the side. Brother had made an actual considered clone, straight up clone, that was one of their first machines that they put out after World War II. And the subsequent models were all just incrementally better every time they came out with a different machine. And then this is a feed dog drop. The feed dogs on a Class 15, off the top of my head, I don't remember if they drop, but I don't think they do. And so on the class, on these improved 15s, most of them will have a button here, and it will say, drop feed, and then it'll have like varying degrees of dropping your feed. So it'll tell you, and in your manual, it'll tell you where it'll like completely drop the feed dogs. And the feed dogs here will just disengage, and that'll allow you to do embroidery and darning and sort of some crazy fancy stuff that you wouldn't be able to do unless you can sort of like mimicking some hand sewing techniques, especially with darning and mending, and if you're doing free motion quilting and stuff that really you need to be able to do in order to get stuff running. This machine isn't super clean, by the way. I apologize because I'm in the process of cleaning it up, and I've sort of changed out the wheel on it and added some of the bling, as my sister will call it. Condition. This machine, I bought it, and very often people will want hundreds of dollars for various vintage sewing machines, and whenever someone asks me what is a sewing machine worth, and the answer is whatever somebody's willing to pay for it. In this case, I paid $25 for this machine, and I was aware of its condition. It has some chipping in the paint. Some of this can be like color matched, and I can touch it up. This is for my own personal collection because I think it's really fun to have a yellow machine, and a yellow and blue machine is even more, more fun. Talking about condition, This machine looks a lot less like someone's had any, inexperienced hands on it, if you will. The screw heads are all sort of intact. You're going to note that there's no dented or stripped screw looking things. The one screw, this itself, the motor mount, this is very often where you're going to adjust. The, actually adjust this where you can see this because I'm going to focus on it for a second. This is very commonly something you're most common to adjust because the belts are variable on these sewing machines, and so you're going to raise and lower this bracket in order to tighten your belt. On this sewing machine itself, you're going to see, and here's really where the condition issue is and what I'm going to talk about. Again, my number one concern for anyone who's into vintage sewing machines is electrical safety. And again, if you're not comfortable with sort of, obviously taking it to a qualified person to repair is always important. And obviously you yourself can probably do some very basic stuff, but just again, making sure that you're comfortable with, you're comfortable with the kind of work that needs to be done. And obviously electrical is, obviously the most risky thing you can possibly mess around with. And very often I pay people to handle this for me. I do repairs on electrical work for different sewing machines, but there are people who offer services where they will rewire them themselves. So this machine, I had done an initial pass, and the cord, this is actually missing a little plate that goes around the bottom of the cord. That's not a showstopper. The condition of this cord is okay. I didn't see anything off the top of my head where I was like, oh, this is really a problem. And I think I plugged it in briefly just to check, whatever, after really taking a look at it. But after getting it out of the cabinet, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. After getting it out of the cabinet and loosening the motor mount cord, you're going to see what I saw, which is that this at some point has been on fire. Which, again, the amount of work and energy and time and money it takes to repair these vintage machines, you really want to be very cautious with your electrical and make sure that you are inspecting as much as you can. You don't want to have these plugged in and then cause a problem in your house. And you want to be as safe as possible. Like I said, you want to just be super cautious. And in the way that I handle this is I actually assume that my electrical is shot and that everything is going to catch on fire and then proceed accordingly. And taking a look at the rest of the cord, I don't see any other issues, but this particular I've been on fire section, if I pull this back to where it was, I'm going to show you how this came. That was completely hidden underneath the bed of the sewing machine. And so I didn't actually see it until I took everything apart and was cleaning it. And when I pulled the plug, it's funny, when I pulled the plug up from the base of the machine, that's when I saw both the cracking and that it had been on fire at some point. And if I look under the bed here, you'll probably see that there's charred marks. All right. Electrical chaos aside, the improved 15 versions, these straight stitch Japanese, made in Japan sewing machines are fantastic collector items in my mind. I think that they're more commonly found. These brothers are just some of my favorites. They're badged Kingston, and I think there's some precision ones. There's loads of Japanese sewing machine makers during this time. It's a bit of a boom. There's some wackadoodle ones that are really wonderful. I'll hopefully get a chance to show off a few of the more oddball fun designs from this late 50s time period, which is pretty much my favorite time period for sewing machine collecting. But like I said, these class 15 machines, there's a reason that they were very popular. They were also relatively cheap. I think that sewing machines were always expensive. Singer sewing machines were very expensive. The Japanese-made sewing machines, these had less labor costs. A lot of common sort of discussion is around the Japanese sewing machine sort of putting Singer out of business. In my mind, I think Singer put Singer out of business by not really innovating beyond the straight stitch machine for a very long time. And then by the late 40s, by the time World War II ended and the world had sort of woken up from, being just, absolutely in survival mode, the sewing machine market had changed tremendously, and the ready-to-wear market and industrial sewing, everything had just sort of turned into a whole different world, and the demand for straight stitchers plummeted as zigzag capable machines came into play. And so a lot of the machines that you would have from, they actually had zigzag capable, straight stitchers, and they would have there's an attachment, and we'll get a chance to maybe show that on the channel for you. That they really, my sister calls them the drunken moving, because there's an attachment that just moves the fabric back and forth. And it does feel a bit like you're trying to walk a straight line, a drunken straight line when you're zigzagging. So it's not super precise, and you feel like a little out of control. I think if you had a lot of experience with a zigzag attachment, you'd be a pro at it, but I prefer a zigzag machine when I'm doing zigzagging. I don't pull out the attachment very often. So yeah, like I said, these machines were wonderful. Singer had the capability to do a bunch of this stuff, but really didn't improve on, they kind of found, they added reverse to that class 15 machine, and then they just were like, we're good. And they didn't do anything else to it for, they made them in different colors in the 60s. So they kind of put that into production in the 30s. And by the 60s, they went a whole 30 years without making one change to the sewing machine. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? But the Japanese engineering, they really did sort of like, how could we make this better, and how can we make this more appealing, and put them in different colors, or some candy colors, or just bright and fun, and definitely differentiating themselves from those black machines that everybody's grandma had, I guess, at the time. So again, this is sort of a recap of class 15, sort of, two different bookends of class 15 machines, showing two different, sort of concerns on the same type of machine, and that's always the electrical. On my next sort of installment with these class 15s, I'll just sort of, show you something that's in good condition. Again, if you're starting out, these are wonderful machines to start out with. Again, supreme caution with working with electrical. If you're doing any repairs, I don't recommend starting out with anything that does require any repair. But again, you really need to make sure that things are in excellent shape with the cords and the motors, and just making sure that everything is working well. A lot of these, if you're terrified of the motor aspects of them, there are machines that are treadle capable, and I'll sort of cover that in another later episode as well. I hope this was informative, and like I said, look out for fun machines to work on. If you are a experienced vintage sewing machine person, this is all nothing new for you. But if you're just starting out, or you just kind of wanted to see a different take on different machines, this is sort of a good way to get yourself acclimated to what you're looking for. And if you have one of these machines for sale, be mindful of the amount of work that it will take for a particular collector or someone. The value in these machines are very often related to either like being rare, in terms of not rare as in there's not many of them, but rare in the sense that they have some capability, especially in the 50s, that other machines don't have. They're desirable, and they have, something interesting about them. Yellow machines sometimes are desirable. Sometimes purple machines are desirable. There's like different things. Pink machines are very, very desirable. It's just something to think about if you're, evaluating sewing machines in your market, and you just want to sort of, make decisions about what kind of, if there's something you wanted to pick up and play with, it's a good place to start. All right. Good luck, and hope to see you back on the channel sometime soon.